one bureau may actually be asked to present on multiple days. It also means that we will not have the opportunity to speak to all of our bureau issues as we have in years past. Just for context, there are 7 different budget work sessions, and 3 of those Portland Parks and Recreation will present. Actually, at this moment in time, right now, is a budget overview and COVID-19 response. That's happening in City Council currently. On March 11th, Central City Services will be covered. On March 16th, addressing the urgent houseless crisis. On March 18th, community safety, and that's one of the work sessions in which we will be presenting specific to the Park Ranger program. On March 23rd, laying the groundwork for stimulus and recovery, and that's going to be a compilation of infrastructure, permitting, and development bureau. So we will also be participating in that work session. And then on March 30th, there's cross-issue bureaus. So we'll be presenting along with PBOT and Civic Community and Civic Life on that day. And then on April 1st is economic survival and stabilization, community and business support. We are not participating in that one, but it certainly sounded interesting and I thought you all might want to know about it. Moving on to the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability Shelter to Housing Continuum update. As you all know, the City Council declared a housing emergency in October of 2015 to help address the city's growing homeless and affordable housing crisis. The declaration expedited development of shelters and affordable housing projects and made it easier to provide service locations to people who are experiencing homelessness. Unfortunately, even with this dedicated attention, the need has skyrocketed, especially during the COVID economic recession. Over the past 2 years, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability has developed proposals to change certain city code requirements that would expand the housing and shelter options for individuals and households with extremely low incomes. BPS, I mean, we've talked about this at the board meeting and the board has written a letter in response to this, but I just want to keep everyone informed. BPS will be bringing this item to City Council on March 17th as a regular ordinance. There is a slight possibility that the council date will get shifted to allow for more internal discussions, as well as a council work session about the policy. As a part of this hearing process, Commissioner Rubio looks forward to hearing from the community and hopes that that discussion will help answer some of her questions. The citywide proposal increases the allowance of permanent and temporary shelters siting. And I'd like to do a quick review for what this will mean for parks and natural areas and for all parks managed properties. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability proposal would not allow permanent shelters on open space zoned properties or Portland Parks and Recreation properties, but it would allow the public or nonprofit operation of outdoor shelters, including tents, yurts, small cabins, or vehicles to be placed in all parks and natural areas for up to 180 days in a calendar year. With the current proposal, city bureaus and their respective commissioners in charge, or in some cases, the directors who have delegated authorities for approval of real property related agreements, will have sole discretion for approval of all temporary activities and shelters, temporary and permanent. I'm gonna pause to see if there's any questions because it was a lot of information, even though I know we've talked about it previously.
Hey, Adina.
Just to clarify, Adina.
Oh, go for it, Paul. I can follow.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, did I understand correctly that BPS would have sole discretionary authority over what is allowed in these areas?
So I can jump in on that. So the land use code would be updated by City Council, and the proposal that all open space zoned, or almost all of our property at Portland Parks is open space zoned, would be allowed for temporary structures like camp tents or cabins or vehicles for up to 180 days in a calendar year. And that decision-making authority for parks rests for real property agreements with the director. As our standard practice is, we brief our parks commissioner on any substantial agreement of this would be one. And so of course we would consult with the parks commissioner, but for parks, it rests with the parks director. Each bureau, has different authorities. And so in some cases that might rest with the commissioner in charge of the bureau. In other cases, it might rest with the director.
Okay,
So just to be clear, there are other bureaus that have oversight over open space other than parks.
Well,
and BPS is one of them.
for instance,
BES, Water Bureau.
BES, and this isn't just a city issue, Metro. And again, we're just focusing on the open space, but the policy is for all zoning. So all residential zones, all zoning would be open for this.
Okay,
I want to note that Lauren has her hand up.
thank you.
Thanks, Adina. I also want to add, as Adina said, it's 180 days per calendar year, and that can go back to back. So it really could be a whole year when the temporary facilities could be in our park.
Okay, I'm going to move on if that's okay, Paul.
I have a quick question. Sorry, Adina, this is Panay. Todd, sorry, you said that this could apply to Metro property in the city limit of Portland. Is that correct?
So this is a land use change, and it's not about the property ownership. So yeah, so this
Okay.
is for all zones, regardless, industrial, residential, commercial, open space. And we're just focusing it today on, Portland Parks and Recreation, but this would impact Metro owned properties in the city of Portland as well.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Todd. And then Adina, do you know if there's a plan to increase social services to, as people are able to stay in a place for 180 days, that provides the stability for folks to hopefully move into housing? Do you know if the Bureau has plans to invest in programming to increase the programming or social service contact with individuals? They've
So-
gone through that programming kind of have they dove into that at all?
So when you say the Bureau, Portland Parks and Recreation is not planning to provide any services, but I do know that the Shelter to Housing Continuum, a sort of working group, and the Planning and Sustainable Committee, when they talk about almost all of these interventions, because this is just one of, I think, 4 that are code changes that will sort of change the approach to affordable housing and transitional housing. In particular, for the shelters, the idea is that the operator would be providing wraparound services to a certain degree. I don't know what the extent is. I'm sure they're still working out the details on that, though.
Randy,
Adina, just to clarify, so this will allow this to happen, but the authority to actually to implement still rests with you or the commissioner, correct?
I believe it does, but again, there are details that are not clear in the ordinance yet. And I'm hopeful that, and we just heard recently that it looks like some of the council members are recommending an additional work session to talk this through. So I anticipate that some of these nuances that are very unclear to many of us will be discussed at that level.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you, Adina. I'm really appreciating you bringing this up.
Sure, and thanks, Todd, with the assist. So moving on to Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland framework. We completed our third employee gathering last week. Just as a reminder, we spent the first 2 meetings talking about where we are and getting some ideas of what we need to do together as a bureau. As a recap, at Employee Gathering 1, we reviewed summary reports from our Vision 2020 strategic plan and 5-year racial equity plan. At Employee Gathering 2, we talked about the results of our 2019 employee survey and 2020 racial justice listening sessions and discussed how we're approaching that work going forward. In breakout sessions, staff have gave really great feedback on how we can do better to support them. At last week's employee gathering, we took a deeper dive into our equity work and progress and revealed the first tool needed to center our work together, our new equity lens and empowerment tool. Kenya will be sharing more about this later in this meeting. In our 4th meeting, we will start to work on what the Bureau needs to do together. We'll share our plans on how we can translate our work into a new vision statement, mission, values, and strategic objectives, and build in accountability and transparency through performance measures, work plans, and monitoring and evaluation. At the April board meeting, we'd like to present our approach to planning in 2021, including a new vision, mission, values, and strategic objectives, and how we'll connect these to levy funding programs and projects, and talk with you about how you'd like to engage over the spring, summer, and early fall. Overall, the work included in our Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland framework will help us align our goals, strategies, and resources as we build our programs and services for the community. And this work will help inform our fiscal year 22-23 requested budget. In the long term, as we all get comfortable and more disciplined using the framework, it will move us towards being the kind of organization that we want to be, both in terms of our Bureau culture as well as our service to the community. Thanks for sharing that graphic, Brooke. Any questions about Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland?
Thank you, Adina.
Thank
you. Okay, we'll move to our working group reports. And Tamara emailed us early today that she had a conflict and gave us a summary. I don't know if Pune or Alejandra or Katie want to add additional material during our meeting today. All right, we'll roll into financial sustainability and Mike Elliott.
Great, thanks, Paul. So Adina already covered the budget process for fiscal year 21-22. In terms of where things are for the current year, generally everything's tracking to budget pretty well. Given all of the uncertainty, both the revenue and the expense budgets were built pretty conservatively. So it's not surprisingly, we're seeing some positive effects on both sides of the ledger. On the revenue side, while the revenue budget was reduced about $15 million to about $9.5 million, and the Bureau is tracking to that reduced budget and is likely going to end up with surplus. On the expense side, materials and service expenses have been on the low side, but with the recent winter storm cleanup and ramping up for the summer, it's looking like everything's going to land pretty close to budget, or maybe just a little bit below. Golf Fund continues to have strong performance, but as we've touched on a little bit in the past, PIR is continuing to face some challenges, and the Bureau is going to keep watching that and keeping us updated as that moves forward. So overall, in spite of all the big challenges that Parks has faced over the last 12 months, the Bureau is really weathering it and tracking to finish the year pretty well from a fiscal perspective. Just a quick update on Sustainable Future. In our last working group meeting, Sarah Huggins gave us a good overview of Parks Sustainable Future program and the role it's going to serve for the Bureau. And really that role is really about finding a balance between looking at who Parks serves and the services that Parks provides with the resources at its disposal. Shara shared with us that a primary goal for Sustainable Future will be to develop a long-term systems planning model that's proactive rather than reactive. And that was great for us on the working group to hear. The program, as many of you know, currently consists of Sarah, and also, as you probably saw in Brooke's email that I think went out last week, there's a new levy coordinator, Claire Flynn, who will be reporting to Sarah. The crux of the early work plan for Sustainable Future is going to be setting up the new levy for success and fulfilling the promise made to the voters. So really, there's a handful of early goals. One is to get the levy coordinator on board. So goal number 1, check. Another is to appoint members for the levy oversight committee. And you've seen Adina's email, and I know we've talked about that a little bit before. Recruitment's going through the 25th of this month. And then to develop and put in place the outcomes that were identified for the levy, as well as defining some appropriate measures for those outcomes to track them going forward. And then finally, to develop a critical path for implementation to ensure that all of the right resources are in place as Park ramps up to delivery frontline levy services. We've talked a lot in the past about the $500 million deferred maintenance shortfall. And I did mention in the last board meeting that we were shown a model that shows that being mitigated over a 20-year period with some bond issuances of about $1.2 million. In our last working group meeting, Sarah did provide with us a more detailed overview of a debt servicing schedule that shows that this actually is supportable. But of course, that's going to require some political support and voter support. And it will somewhat depend on what happens with other bureaus and their funding requirements as well.
Hey, Mike, I just want to lean in for a sec. I think you meant to say 1.2 billion, but what came out was 1.2 million.
Yeah, slight difference. So 1.2 billion is correct. Sorry about that. And then finally, Sarah posed 2 questions for our working group that I think are going to provide a really good basis for our goal setting and decision making for the Sustainable Future program. And the first question was, what does a sustainable future look like to us? And the second question was, what do we see as the biggest threats to making progress towards a sustainable future? So as a group, we had, I think, a really good starting dialogue around those questions. It was, step number 1. I think we'll continue to evolve. It is a pretty exciting time for the working group to be having these discussions. So it's nice to be thinking long-term. And I want to say to anyone that's on the board that's not on the working group, if you want to provide any input, feel free to reach out to me, or I'll offer up other members of the working group as well. And that's pretty much what I have. Does anybody else on the group want to add anything to what I said? No?
You covered it really well, Mike. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Mhm.
I'm going to substitute for Patty on land use and infrastructure. We met last week and covered a lot of the usual potential projects. So I-5 Rose Quarter project, there's not much to report there, although there is the news in the paper about how wide the improvements would be. So it's definitely a highway capacity project. So that's still of great concern. PBOT is re-engaging on the I-5 bridge crossing. So that's encouraging. The city's engaging on that. So we'll see where that goes. We talked about using the equity lens, having that in place to look at level of service across the city. And on South Park blocks, we're going to meeting with the neighborhood group this week, apparently, and we're waiting for some review, and that gets us to the Green Loop, and the culinary corridor is moving forward. So that's an exciting step forward to reinvigorate downtown. So Prosper Portland is leading on that. And continuing to work on the South Reach plan in terms of a no wake zone for the power boats that are using that area. And our favorite, the off-road cycling master plan, it's looking to be wrapped up relatively soon without city council. It's the thing that no one wants to touch, even with a 10-foot pole. And let's see, I think that those were the major highlights that I had in my notes. And Bonnie or anyone else, if you can add to that, that'd be great.
No, I think you covered it really well. And I'm glad to see Patty here.
Yes.
Paul, I didn't know anything about the meeting with the neighborhood group on South Park Block. When is that?
Lauren or Brett can probably fill that in because I didn't put in my notes what day that was.
Yeah, we had that this week. And we did meet with the Downtown Neighborhood Association. The purpose of the meeting, it was set up actually by Brennan Spencer Hartle. And the purpose of the meeting was to see if they were interested in participating with us in revising the historic nomination. It sounds like they are. They were on a tighter timeline than we would be able to respond to. Tate has already talked with the South Park Box consultants to see if they would help participate in revising the historic nomination. So they are willing to do that, but they would not be able to get to it due to their other workload until June. So that's kind of where we are right now. The downtown neighborhood was going to go back and talk about it and to get back to us about how to proceed. It was very positive though. They want to work together with us, and I think we'll make changes to it and resubmit it probably fall.
Great
Thanks.
to hear that it was a positive meeting. Thank you. All right.
Hey, Paul, this is Todd. Just a quick question. Since there could be some things that are happening on the shelter to housing continuum project between now and your next land use committee meeting, would the committee be available to maybe have an ad hoc meeting in advance? Because the council vote could be before the next Parks Board meeting or the next land use meeting.
I'm certainly open to that. So Patty, does your schedule allow that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm signed up to speak on next Wednesday anyway. And
Yeah,
we'll
me
see
too.
whether that gets postponed or not.
So we'll just loop back to the land use committee once we hear if there's going to be a council work session. They normally don't take public testimony at council work sessions. It's just for the council members to learn. So maybe the right time would be after the council work session to maybe have a committee meeting.
Thanks, Todd. All right. Bonnie, are there any updates to the process improvement ad hoc?
Not much, but a little bit of an update that I just got is I know that Tanya and Rachel Felice, her counterpart in BES, their natural area managers are coordinating and trying to, better define roles and responsibilities in alignment with each of the Bureau's missions. And that the tree planting permit was extended proactively by Urban Forestry for BES to do their tree planting. But the other things are a little bit on hold. The liaison position, which is currently not funded, and then an organizational restructuring on BES's part, which is also a little bit holding things in place for now. So, but as things continue to develop in different divisions, I know that staff is going to keep me apprised, and I in turn will keep you all apprised.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Just a little correction. Rachel Felice is actually the city nature manager for Portland Parks, not for BES.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
I don't know if Tanya had anything to add or Adina had any other corrections to my report.
No, that was great. We are having collaborative conversations with BES about those sites. And so when we have more updates, we'll keep you in loop.
Thanks, Tanya. All right, Alejandra. Our affirmation of equity statement.
Yes, affirmation of equity statement. So as Tamara mentioned in her email update, we had the opportunity to meet with staff and board leadership to discuss the two versions of the updated affirmation of equity statement that were presented to them earlier this year. So the conclusion was that there were desirable elements in each of those versions. So the next step is to make revisions. So I'll be consolidating those two documents before sending them in again for more revisions.
Thank you, Alejandra. Any questions?
I'll just note also that we talked about aligning the affirmation of equity statement with the parks equity statement, not that they would be one and the same, but aligning them. So that second piece is still in formation. So if this is delayed and Alejandra has nothing to report for the next couple of months, it's all the staff's fault. No, I'm just kidding. We're working together so that these are closely aligned statements. Thank you.
Great. All right. Randy, it's your turn.
Hey, Paul, sorry, did we want to do nominating update
Yeah.
or do you want to do that later?
Yes. Sorry, Aaron. I meant to, I was very much aware that we wanted to start for you at 9:45, and for whatever reason, I just skipped right over to Randy.
Oh,
So
no, it's okay. Sorry, Randy, I'm going to butt in here. So I think most of you are aware that we're starting the nominating process. So that is a timeline that kind of starts in February and goes through June. There is some flexibility, is my understanding, in that timeline. And I think that we are maybe a little bit behind on it, but that's okay. We can make up for that. A few changes this year. The way that we accept applications is changing. And is Brooke here? Brooke, is the application actually available yet? Oh, there's Brooke.
Hi, I have not seen the application yet. I reached out to our colleague in the Office of Community and Civic Life who have taken the reins back for coordinating recruitment for advisory body members. And I'm going to meet with her tomorrow to talk about the details. So I will have more information then. But yeah, they're switching to NeoGov. So before, as many of you applied, it was like a PDF that they posted online. And then we did SurveyMonkey last year because that seemed like the best approach. And so this year it will be via NeoGov, and I will have lots of questions about if that's just a standard template or if there's something we can do to modify it and make it more parks oriented. I will. Let me know if you have questions that you want me to bring to that discussion as well.
Okay. So when we have the application available, just so people know, we have two, I think, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have 2 spots that we're filling. So we're looking for.
I think it's actually 3 now. Yeah, so
okay.
We have Ian who's rolling off, and why am I blanking on the other one? Well, the news is
so Jenny is resigning to take a new position.
Okay.
And moving. And Tamara is not renewing her term.
Okay.
Or she's not seeking a second term.
Okay, so we'll have 3 positions we want to fill, and Patty and I are leading the nominating committee. It would be great to get a few more people on that group. The work of the group is mostly around, takes place around the kind of reviewing the applications, doing the interviews, making some recommendations to the board. So it's the interview process. I think last year, we did do it on Zoom last year, as a lot of you probably remember because you were a part of it. And I think it was kind of 2 half days is the time commitment that was. I think getting at least, I don't know, Patty, if you have any thoughts, but getting at least like 2 more people on our group would be super helpful.
Yeah, and I actually think, Aaron, a couple things. I think that Patty is actually chairing the officer nominating committee, and you're chairing
that's fine. That wasn't clear because nobody told me that, but
yeah. I mean, but
it's totally fine with me.
Yeah.
It's
but definitely, we do want to ensure that you and the other committee members have ample opportunity to, be involved throughout the process, even though we're getting started a little bit late. I mean, I think one of the things that we want to make sure too is we usually take the time to review the questions that are included in the application. So it would really trouble me if it were available and you hadn't had a chance to do that yet. So I think Brooke did send out, I believe, all the materials from the last go
Yes,
round.
and Patty, so there was some confusion because Paul sent an email to me and Patty about this. So I kind of assumed that me and Patty were doing this. So Patty and I haven't had a chance to talk. We'll talk next week, but that's helpful to know that right now it's just me on the nominating. There's kind of two nominating committees, so people are aware. There's the nominating committee for bringing people onto the board. And then there's the nominating committee for the chair and vice chair. What, I'm sorry if I'm getting the titles wrong on that, which are Paul and Bonnie right now. So those are kind of two separate things. And last year, me and Tamara did the nominating committee, and Pat and somebody else, I can't remember who off the top of my head, did the Mike, okay, did the other one. And so,
Well, I'm sorry, for the officer nominating committee.
the officer nominating committee, right. So anyway, just, yeah, no, and so anyway, so Brooke has sent that, those questions, and I, right now it's just been me looking at them, or me and Patty kind of emailed about it, but that brings even more need for people to be on the actual nominating, committee, not the officer nominating committee. If it's not me and Patty, I thought I was excited to have a co-person in that, but and yeah, it would make sense if it's to have a group look at the questions again, besides just me reviewing them, so there might be some more work there, especially now that I know that it's just been me. So I'd love to get some volunteers. I did it last year and it was my first year. So if you're in your first year, feel absolutely welcome. I mean, it's very fresh for you, the process. So you're actually probably a great person to be on this committee, having gone through it in the Zoom iteration and in recent times. So I saw Paul raised his hand. Is that your volunteer?
A volunteer, yes.
Okay. And okay, and Bonnie, okay, who else? David and Patty. Okay, anyone else? Okay, good. And so of course the full board can support in the work too, especially once the application is available, in reaching out to your networks, getting the word out there. The one thing we haven't done yet as a committee, which we can do together, is helping kind of figure out we have a kind of board matrix looking at certain areas of expertise, et cetera, and seeing what we might need to fill with the individuals that will be rolling off the board. So that will be some work that we can do. And we'll basically, once we have the application up and the material, the kind of materials available, we can put together a draft email for you that you can kind of use to forward to your networks to get the word out there that we're looking for people for this. So yeah.
Thank you, Erin.
Questions? Did I kind of cover everything?
You covered it well.
Well, I'll just say one additional thing, which is, since we are technically, the process from our old timeline starts in February, towards the end of February, but we are delayed, and we're probably going to, just based on the fact that we're required to use a new system for accepting applications that's not up and running yet. The timeline is kind of based on the idea of getting board members in before we do that board retreat. It's kind of the background behind the timeline, but there is flexibility in that. And so we'll kind of see how it goes, I think, with the timeline set up. But I do feel like we can make it work if that application's up in the next week or so within the given timeline. So there's room in there. Because in the current timeline, we would stop accepting applications April 9th, but I think we could probably push that back a few weeks and still be fine. So, okay.
That sounds good.
Done.
Thank you. Any questions for Erin or for Patty in terms of the officer nominating committee? Okay. All right, now we will get to Randy's report. Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, I'm going to screen share. I hope. There we go. My messy desktop. Okay, everybody see that?
Yes,
Oops,
Randy.
so this is our 20th anniversary. And our official articles of incorporation were May 11th. And so we're sort of kicking things off then with our spring Friends and Allies Summit. Some of you, I think, attended our fall summit, our first one we ever did last year. And it went really well. This one, we're planning on these being, twice yearly, one sort of celebratory and one more, technical. And the celebratory one this spring will be honoring our founding board chair, Joey Pope. For those of you who don't know Joey, she was really one of the major visionaries of our park system of the last 30 years. She chaired the Vision 2020 plan.
I think it's a number,
and that's where the foundation, came from. The first idea from the foundation. She and Jim Francisconi, then Parks Commissioner, cooked that up, and she transitioned from seeing this huge task force that produced Vision 2020 to then founding the Portland Parks Foundation. She's also been pivotal at Hoyt Arboretum in terms of really putting together the deals that produced the Visitor Center up there, and then more recently, still to be completed, the Bristlecone Trail, a sort of accessible trail up there. She's been a force behind the Community Music Center, and then she was a absolutely pivotal force behind getting Leach Botanical Garden transitioned from a small kind of community organization to what it's really growing into being now. Amazing place with their new capital project, which she helped get off the ground. So we're really going to be happy to honor her. And then we'll give out our Parks Champion Awards too, which are for volunteers. And those nominations are out and due on March 19th. So if there's anybody you want to nominate, I'll put Jessica, our operations director, in her email in the chat when I get done with the slideshow. We're also increasing our small grants for the year, doing 10 grants of $2,000, and we're going to make those available for operating, not just projects, as has typically been the case. And we're trying to create a really easy application process so we can get money out to folks. And then fall, we're starting to plan the summit for the fall, and we have a steering committee that's been guiding our efforts, and we'd like to add some more folks to that. So, and we pay stipends for that. So if there's anybody you think would be interested in helping plan these summits going forward, I'd really love to hear from you. Our big project that's on our front burner right now, we're pretty excited about. I'll give you a sort of our pitch deck on that. So downtown, as we all know, is suffering from a lot of issues. We have an idea. We'd like to take a walk together. So we know the pandemic caused businesses and residents to suffer, leaving the city's normally bustling street life muted or gone. And public buildings and institutions and arts organizations and businesses have been vandalized very badly. But at the same time, downtown and our parks became an epicenter for protests against Portland and Oregon's and America's deeply rooted racism. And from the marches to the street theater to the murals, our parks and public spaces became a stage and a canvas filled with urgent and creative calls for meaningful change. So Portland's park blocks, our oldest parks, or among them, Chapman and Lonsdale are technically the oldest, but the park blocks form a spine through the city's center. Of course, they belonged to someone else at one time, before Portland was Portland. But today, the park blocks form a cultural and spiritual and social service and creative corridor through the city. If you really look at the neighboring institutions all along there, it's a wonderful snapshot of many, many good things in our city. And so we'd like to ask the question of whether our oldest parks can be a place for healing and reinvention. We'd like to take a walk together, but moreover, we'd like to make a walk together. Our idea is to have a series of paseos inspired by the Mediterranean tradition of the evening stroll that kind of wakes up the city. So these would be evening walks stretching along the park blocks, the full length of the park blocks, including the Midtown blocks, which of course were sold off and built upon. And we're thinking of this as a linear festival of food and artisan markets and music and performance and art installations and above all, ideas. We believe this can be flexible as needed for social distancing. We look at the farmers market and other markets that have been done well. And then also it's looking fairly optimistic for vaccinations. And we want it to be inclusive, diverse, authentic, and as much as anything, a kind of active political and civic reimagination. So we want to build community strength and unity with focus on equity and social justice and creativity. And we hope to boldly awaken the city and its downtown in new ways and celebrate our 20th anniversary. We have some tentative dates that we're working with that we're going to pin down. We're thinking about two scenarios. The one we favor would be 3 consecutive Friday or Saturday evenings. That's essentially doing 3 festivals. And so it's quite expensive. And so we're trying to figure out ways to bring that cost down and see if there might be some help from the city to make that happen. Everybody who we've talked to agrees that the 3 consecutive weeks would be a sort of better way to do it. But we have another scenario to do just 3 consecutive evenings, a regular kind of festival format, which is about less than half the cost we've scoped. We have a request I'd like to make of the well, first, let me go back. Any questions about the Paseo concept?
No question other than I think it's a great concept. So thank you for pushing this forward.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. It's been fun to cook it up. It's going to be scary to pull off on this runway, but we have one of the best event planners in the city working with us. He worked with us on the opening of the Barbara Walker Crossing, and most recently just pulled off the big festival down in the Zidell Yards for Northwest Film Center. Anybody else? I can't see the grid, so I don't know if anybody's got their hand up or anything.
Sounds fun.
Good. Hope to see you all there. So I have a request of the board. As most of you know, we have received money in the past from the mayor's budget for about 4 years now. And we ask for this funding from the mayor's budget because with many of our projects, we work across bureaus, the Barbara Walker Crossing being the most dramatic example of that. We work not only across bureaus, but across jurisdictions to raise the money and put that project together. This request would actually be a restoration of the funding that we more typically have received. Last year it was cut by half, and understandably. And this money allows us to focus on fundraising and implementation of projects rather than on our own operations. So it's a big help. It allows us to concentrate on what we are built to do, which is to help people help parks. And since we began receiving city funding in 2017, that funding has leveraged about a 10-to-1 return on investment for investment in parks. So it's a pretty good deal, all in all, and would love to get the board's support, a letter of support for this, if that is of interest. I'll go off screen share now. Happy to answer any questions.
Randy, thank you for the presentation. I'm happy to write a letter of support for this. It makes complete sense that we would support you. So Bonnie and I can draft that. If people want to jump on, that's great. We need to get it to council next week, so we don't have a lot of time to go back and forth. But I think we could have those who want to sign on, but it shouldn't. I don't see it being controversial unless I'm missing something.
Hey, Randy, this is Vicente. Great idea. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to do some coordination with the Joint Office of Houseless Services. Because of the event, there's likely going to be displacement of that community that uses the park every day. And council may have questions about the efforts in trying to engage that community for, support once this activity takes place.
Yeah, thanks, Vicente. That's a good idea. We haven't approached the city about. We are approaching some of the organizations that work with the houseless population in hopes that we can, have some meaningful interaction with them and possibly even participation in some manner. But I'll follow up on that. Thanks. Well, thanks for letting me present, and I'll keep you posted as things evolve. And once again, if you have any nominations for the Parks Champion, please let us know. There's a handy dandy nomination form on our website. So thank you.
Well, we are right on time.
That's kind of fun. All right, so now it's time for the racial equity lens, and Kenya is going to lead us through that with some additional or introductory comments by Adina.
Kenya. Kenya's been working on this. Kenya's been working on this for quite a while. He's going to provide a lot of background so folks have an understanding of why we're doing this and how we move the process forward. And it was an exceptional ground up field staff generated initiative. And so I'm really proud of the work that Kenya was able to. I will pass it to him.
Thank you, Director Long. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully it works the way I think it's supposed to work. You should be seeing a plan overview slide on your screen.
It's up.
All right, great. So, just a quick, recap. We've talked about the 5-year racial equity plan before. Just as a refresher, it was developed in 2015 and launched by the Bureau in 2016. And the racial equity plan, has 6 objectives, 22 strategies, and 100 action items. Before I get into the racial equity lens, I just want to, be very, forward about, the racial equity plan, the 5-year racial equity plan. There were some challenges and some issues, things such as, the scope of the plan wasn't matched with, the human and financial resources, and there were some action items not measurable or trackable. And as far as the accountability and the completion of the plan, as far as some of the action items, they weren't assigned to any specific people or their work plans. And the plan had minimal community input, and it was only received by employee input, and that that influences development. But one of the biggest items in the racial equity plan was the fact that we called out the need for, a racial equity lens. It was part of goal 1 in the plan, and it never happened. And so a couple years ago, the Bureau's diversity and equities public, it's the policy subcommittee of what we call a DEC. They really expressed the need for a racial equity lens. So when I came on board, I took this recommendation seriously, and what happened was that we started meeting. It was the E&I team, also members of the DEC policy subcommittee, and also FEST. FEST is our fostering equity support team, and we started the work to develop the Bureau's racial equity lens. And as part of that work, we researched existing racial equity lens models, and we had several check-ins, work sessions with various groups in the Bureau, and we developed a questionnaire, and we sent that out, and that helped us develop many components of the racial equity lens. And with that questionnaire that we sent out Bureau-wide, we received almost 200 responses, and those responses really helped us set the steps and the guiding questions that I'll present today. So some of you may know what a racial equity lens, but here at the city and here at Parks, we're taking the definition from our Office of Equity and Human Rights, where the racial equity lens, it's that critical thinking approach to undoing individual, institutional, and structural racism, and it evaluates the burden, the benefits, and the outcomes to underserved communities. And this is, the shared and the common understanding that, we are providing for the Bureau as far as what is a racial equity lens, and when you think of the function of it, it introduces a set of questions into a decision-making process, and it helps decision makers focus on equity, both in their process and their outcomes. It's also a helpful tool that will support staff and create intentional processes for centering equity and considering what voices are not heard and who may be burdened by decisions. And applying a racial equity lens to our work, it will help the Bureau reflect on how our decisions may disproportionately burden communities such as our, such as our BIPOC community and people living with disabilities, people living with low income, immigrant and refugee, and also our unsheltered communities. And by centering the people most impacted by systemic racism, everyone benefits. So when you think about the need for a racial equity lens, one of the main things is to develop a consistent Bureau-wide approach to addressing inequities. And it also will help, create a more inclusive perspective that draws attention to how our decisions may affect underserved groups. But a racial equity lens, it's also an empowerment tool. And, it empowers us to be deliberate and be mindful and supportive of a more inclusive workplace, and also understand, how all of our actions may impact others. So a few tips for using the racial equity lens. The first, and I think one of the most important tips, is applying the racial equity lens as early as possible, and using it before decisions have been made, so that the racial equity lens can help shape outcomes. And the one thing that really want to be frank about, the racial equity lens won't really tell you what action to take, but it will help you discuss and reflect on how equitable an action may be when you're going through the decision-making process. Also, a racial equity lens is an iterative process, and it's encouraged to revisit decisions and revisit your process and have that back and forth. And what I'll go into next is, there's some steps we developed, and there's also primary guiding questions with every step. But a racial equity lens should be customized to specific decisions or a specific type of work that you may be doing when you're thinking about your processes and decision making. So I'll run through these 7 steps, and the first step is think about the desired result. So when you want to support an equitable outcome, you have to be proactive, and you have to plan equity into the process. Equity cannot be an afterthought. It's not an add-on. Don't bring someone to the table after you're kind of have a well-cooked idea or decision. And you also want to be proactive and really think about having a more equitable process. It really is about utilizing the voices and the perspective of people most impacted. And here you can see some of our guiding questions. These are what we call kind of our standard, our baseline guiding questions in our lens. And you as you use the lens, you ask yourself, you ask the team that you've gathered as you go into your decision making. You ask yourself these questions. For example, how will decisions influence racial equity and center underserved communities? Step 2 is engage internal and external stakeholders. This step's about being intentional about who we center in our work. It's about the ongoing work of building trusting relationships and also collaborating with each other and also the community. In order to have that inclusive process with equitable results, it really is about having the right people at the table, but engaging those folks also. Step 3 is gather data. And what does this mean? Why is it important to gather information? Well, it's to help build on understanding so you can make better informed decisions, and you can draw from many different perspectives once you've taken the time to gather the right information. It means different things though from different perspectives. So a reason that you may want to gather data is to have a clearer picture of your initiatives and your strategies, but also the data helps you better identify disparities. Our step number 4, determine who benefits and or who is burdened. So this is really about righting wrongs and learning from past mistakes. And also, you start to build a clearer picture of who you need to center and also where you need to prioritize your efforts. Step 5, diminish harm and develop opportunities. Well, this is about creating that welcoming environment. It's about building the respect. It's about being inclusive for everyone. It's about listening more with empathy and being sensitive, and also taking more inclusive actions. The other aspect of this is, developing opportunities based on what people need, what the community needs, and as I said before, when we center people the most impacted, everyone benefits. Step number 6, evaluate and be accountable. And this is very crucial to the racial equity lens and the process, to make sure that, what we're doing is having a positive impact. And it makes, and it's a way for us to know that we are lifting up those voices of the most impacted and we are creating change. If we're not measuring our results, we won't know if we're making the right type of change, and we won't be sure if we're making the equitable changes that we should be making. And also, this is about following up. This is about building relationships and not participating in transactional type relationships with community. And our last step, step number 7, is communicate. You know, it's very important that, you know, as we continue to communicate, you know, it gives us these opportunities to, you know, build the relationships, to continue to build collaborations and opportunities to find solutions. As I mentioned before, you know, this is not transactional. So you may not have a need from the community, but that doesn't mean that you should not, you know, reach out and stay connected with community. And really part of this is not about engaging community, but listening to community. And internally for us, it's also about listening to staff and listening to the needs of both community and staff and communicating those needs. So our next steps for our racial equity lens, you know, we're going to have an initial rollout of our lens, and the equity and inclusion team, we're going to host weekly training workshops. You know, for our first round of trainings, you know, we'll be inviting managers, supervisors, and staff that have program and community decision-making duties. But we want to prioritize our staff that will be involved with our summer recreation and environmental education programs. So, excuse me, during our workshops, you know, we'll provide, you know, ample, you know, opportunity to, you know, answer questions about the lens. You know, we'll practice scenarios that are very specific to a division's work. We'll also discuss ways to improve the lens and also share new demographic data and trends. And one thing, like for managers and supervisors who are not, you know, in decision-making capacities, you know, we're still hosting training workshops because it's our goal to have as many staff as possible familiar with the racial equity lens. We feel that the more, you know, we all become familiar with applying the racial equity lens, the better we're all going to be at informing change and creating equitable opportunities. So next, I want to discuss our racial equity statement and the process. You know, we know that racial equity and the changing culture of the Bureau is very important to many staff. And the ENI team, you know, we've been asking a lot of questions, asking for a lot of feedback. And, you know, a few things have become very apparent to us. You know, as Director Long mentioned, this was a very ground up process. And many staff, you know, they let us know they were tired of passive and aspirational words and language when we talked about racial equity. You know, the staff wants more accountability. They want more tangible results and action. And with that in mind, you know, as we move forward as a Bureau, you know, we have to start thinking about, you know, a new Bureau racial equity statement. And as you can see here, this is our current Bureau racial equity statement. It's aspirational at best. You know, as it states, you know, we recognize, understand, and encourage the celebration of the differences that surround us. Diversity and equity are vital to Portland Parks and Recreation's, you know, ideals and values. So, you know, we started the process to develop a new racial equity statement. And, you know, we know that a new statement, it'll guide us, it'll remind us of who we are and our commitments to center those Portlanders who we, you know that are, you know, most impacted. And during our process, we held 7 work sessions and we received input from staff from all divisions throughout the Bureau. We had 56 workshop participants. They shared over 360 comments about their insight and values for racial equity and what the Bureau should consider when creating a new, more actionable racial equity statement. And I'll show you here this is a text cloud visualization. It shows many of the words that appear the most from the workshop participants when asked to share their vision of a new racial equity statement. As you can see, community was really forward and center: equity, white supremacy, racism, culture, policy, services. We have words like, low canopy neighborhoods, people of color, whiteness, community connection, community partners, natural areas, marginalized groups, staff. So many different opinions, and this is helping us shape the next iteration of our racial equity statement. So our next steps, we're looking forward to revealing the new statement, at our next all staff gathering. We're also looking forward to the park board's affirmation of equity statement and how it will, support our new racial equity statement. And both our new racial equity statement and our racial equity lens, there'll be a foundation that supports our work for planning for 2021 and our efforts to become an organization where everyone feels safe and they also feel welcomed and respected. And as I wrap up here, I really would like to share with you some of the other work that the team, the E&I team, has been working on, and some tools that they've created since this summer. We created what we call the Equity Hub, and Hub stands for helping understand best practices. We created this resource because it's really important to have all of our equity related resources in one location. And the Equity Hub is also a destination for us. So it's where, staff can, have direct access, to the E&I team with questions related to equity and inclusion. We've also created a Bureau Equity Inventory tool. And this is a tool that we'll use to track, various equity efforts happening throughout the Bureau. It'll allow us to track, share, and communicate internally what divisions and programs are doing when it comes to equity, internally and externally. And this tool will be very helpful in decreasing duplication of the equity efforts and seeing opportunities where we can create more collaboration. And last, here we have what we call Together Time gatherings, and this is just an all staff call, very casual for staff to get together. And as we look forward to hosting more of these events in the near future, it's our intent to have invited guest speakers to discuss various topics of interest, but also give staff the opportunity just to, come share, give us feedback, and it's one of those non-judgment type spaces. So we're really looking forward to more Together Time gatherings. So that's a quick overview of some of the items the E&I team, we've created to advance our equity efforts in the Bureau. And if time allows, more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Kenya, for that really wonderful overview. I am curious if, as the trainings roll out, if there might be opportunities for board members to participate in some of those trainings. You're on mute, Kenya.
Gotcha. Sorry. I don't see why not. It's a lot of folks, but I think that's something we can discuss. Yeah, we can discuss and just figure out what works best for, the capacity of the team and also the time for the board. But I don't see an issue why we cannot have something that, creates more familiarity with the racial equity lens that we're using and that we've just developed. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it really seems like there's a lot of unlearning that people like myself need to do. And that training would be great, to help, through the metaphor of the lens, widen the perspective and to see more clearly, where institutional racism and implicit bias are getting in the way of equitable decisions. So I think it could be really good.
Yeah, also feel free just to reach out to us, if it's not in the traditional sense of a training setting, if you have those questions, we're just an email away.
Yeah. Other thoughts, questions?
So thank you, Kenya, for that really great overview. So are the actual statement and lens now available for us to review so that we can see how it might apply to the different elements that, where we're involved in different bureau activities?
The lens is, and we like to refer to the lens as a pilot as we, get staff up to speed with the statement is, and going, it's about to enter draft, kind of the back and forth and some tweaking. So the statement, no, the lens, yes.
So
just to be clear, the lens is complete.
Yes.
Even though we're saying it's a pilot, because we anticipate that we will adjust it, based on its utilization, and the statement is not complete. So, but when it is, certainly you all will be brought along.
See, Casey has a hand.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to follow up. So I think that's perfectly appropriate. I mean, obviously, it's a living document. I mean, as it gets utilized, I would expect that it would be, revised as it is more or less useful. So should we then be expecting to receive that? Do we need to request it? I guess I'm still unclear on where we go from here.
So Bonnie, I think that we're happy to just share the actual tool, the document. We're in the process of having it made pretty by our marketing people. However, I shouldn't say however, and in addition, Kenya and I have we've just begun talking about the best way to roll it out in terms of training, whether it's by specific work unit. If we want to have blended groups, we're thinking specific work unit because we want to be able to talk about the practicality of using the tool, given the nuances of each work unit. So we're just starting to have that conversation. We're happy to share it, but I don't think we'll have a training in place for a while. And I think also it would be challenging unless we're able to carve out time for this particular board meeting, or if there's an upcoming retreat. We'll have to think about the timing, how much time it's going to take.
So thank you, Kenya. That was a
Casey
great,
has his hand up.
Yeah, that was a great presentation. I want to second Paul's request that if it's not a burden on the staff, to see if we can either be part of or listen into one of the lens working groups. And I wouldn't mind a copy of what you gave today. I wouldn't mind having that in my stack to look at and refer to often.
All right, cool.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Other thoughts or comments? All right, well, Kenya, thank you very much. I think you really laid a lot of information out for people that people are now digesting and will, contemplate here over the coming weeks. So yeah, much appreciated and look forward to learning more.
All right, thank you so much.
You bet. All right, well, that puts us considerably ahead of our schedule. So that is good news for everyone. We typically have this time set aside for thoughts for the upcoming agenda. I also want to just plant the seed. June is our retreat month. Last year we did a virtual retreat just because we're in the middle of the pandemic. Now we're sort of at the end of the beginning of the pandemic. So I don't know if, I just want to put this out there that we don't know how many people would be vaccinated. We're certainly not going to be at a herd immunity level by June. But, you know, if there's a way that we could have some sort of outdoor gathering, I missed last year the connection that we were able to build by being together. And so I just wanted to share that. And it may be completely impractical. And I just still wanted to share that if I had my druthers, I would like to find a way for us to mostly find a way to at least have part of the retreat be in person. So anyways, I wanted to share that. And if people want to respond now, that's great. Or, you know, over the coming weeks, that's fine too. But just really start thinking about how do we make our retreat as engaging and as meaningful as we can this year. I think we did well within the confines of Zoom last year. And there's a certain threshold of there's only so long you can go on a Zoom meeting before it's time to be done with the Zoom meeting. So just wanted to share that with everyone.
Paul and board, my rapid editing of my pitch deck, I left out a couple of important points about the Paseo. One is we're kind of starting it with a lecture series called Reimagining Portland Parks, Public Space, Memory, Creativity, and Spatial Justice. And the first one of those is with a spatial justice designer, Liz Ogbu, and it's next Wednesday. And then in April is Paul Farber from the Monuments Lab, which has been doing a lot of really interesting work about monuments and public memory for well before all the events that have happened in the last year. They've been working on this stuff for about 10 years, and they're setting up field stations across the country to kind of show their techniques and help other communities. And we're hoping it might be one of those field stations might be here. But anyway, that lecture is in April. And then as part of these, we're convening some small think tanks discussions to help evolve some of our ideas for this festival so that we can really make it as inclusive and kind of, in a sense, make it maybe a little bit of a demonstration project for what a more just and inclusive and creative downtown might look like. So we will convene the first of those March 29th, and we're looking for participants in that. So I'm going to put the link to the lecture here, and hope to see some of you there.
Thanks, Randy. Any other thoughts on retreat or agenda for April? If not, we will adjourn very early today.
Paul, I had just a quick question on the timing of the retreat. I think you said June. I don't remember last year, but don't we normally wait until the new board members are on board for that?
That's true, and they're usually on board in June. So.
Oh, I was thinking it was July 1st. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Paul, I just wanted to note that, just a reminder that, of course, we have a lot of lovely outdoor spaces, some of which can be covered, that we could permit out for a retreat. So just to keep that in mind, that might be a more comfortable situation for folks to be out of doors, depending on where everyone is in their vaccination journey. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mike just put in the chat box the pavilion at the Arboretum, which was exactly what I had in mind, because there's a restroom right across the street. So yeah, that's perfect. So, why doesn't everybody put that in their thinking cap and mull it over a bit, and then we can talk more about that as the weeks pass. Okay, well, thank you all, and we'll look forward to an impromptu meeting for the Land Use and Infrastructure Committee before or after the next City Council working session per Todd's input earlier. And I will write a letter of support for the Portland Parks Foundation with Bonnie's input. And anybody who wants to sign on can do that. And with that, we will see you next month. Thanks, everyone.